Hello there, welcome to Max's Cards and Dice Dugout. I'm glad you stopped by. Robert Max here. This is episode 130, and we are under the lights at Bristol for race number 20 of the 1991 Stock Car Project using Downey Games Fast Action Racing. Before we set the field and take a look at the track, let's take a look at the standings coming into race 20 here. As you can see, Bobby Hamilton has increased his lead. He's actually doubled it over Davey Allison. It was 8 points, now it's 16. And well, before I get to the rest of the top 10, I got to say, Hamilton has done this without a win. 13 top 10 finishes and some other decent finishes have showed a lot of consistency from Hamilton, and that's why he's at the top. So the rest of the top 10 after Hamilton and Allison is Alan Kowicki, Rusty Wallace, Sterling Marlin, Harry Gant, Ricky Rudd, Bill Elliott, Dale Earnhardt, and Ernie Irvan. Now, we have been keeping an eye on Dale Earnhardt because in real life he was the Cup champion in 91, and we can see he is now in 9th place, 73 points off the leader. All right, so let's take a look at Bristol. Okay, it's a 0.533 mile oval, and track modifiers here. Contact is a -1 with a +1 for any mechanical issues. So now we'll set the field for the race, and we do that by placing these cards, these driver cards, on this grid. I always mention this grid is not a representation of position on the track, but rather it is an abstraction of different actions on the track and the cars and drivers that are involved in those actions. So the first thing we're going to do, as always, is give the deck a shuffle. All right. And we're going to cut it. And now we'll set the field. So we got Chad Little, Terry Labonte, Alan Kowicki. I should mention, this race took place, before I go any further, on August 24th, 1991. It was the Bud 500. And on that day, Bill Elliott was the pole sitter, and the winner of the race was Alan Kowicki back in 91. All right, so Kyle Petty, Ted Musgrave, another rookie, Rick Wilson, Michael Waltrip, Derek Cope, Stanley Smith, Richard Petty, Harry Gant, Dale Jarrett, Darrell Waltrip, Larry Pearson, Ricky Rudd, Rusty Wallace, Bobby Hillin Jr., Hut Strickland, Bill Elliott, Ken Schrader, Davey Allison, Ernie Irvan, Mark Martin, Mickey Gibbs, Jimmy Means, Jimmy Spencer, Sterling Marlin, Lake Speed, Brett Bodine, Rick Mast, points leader Bobby Hamilton, Dale Earnhardt, Jeff Bodine, Joe Rootman, Morgan Shepherd, and Dave Marcus. All right, so the grid is filled. First thing we're going to do is determine the pole sitter. I'm going to roll these red and white die, reading the white die first, and we'll check the pole ratings or the pole sitter ratings for these drivers. So we got a 25. And 25 is Mark Martin. So Mark Martin is going to be the pole sitter for this race. So we'll give him the marker for right now. And we'll mark that on the score sheet. Do a lot of bookkeeping off camera, so you'll have to excuse me there. So Mark Martin is the pole sitter, and he is going to face a challenge. And that challenge will be coming from 14 Ken Schrader. All right. Now, only in this challenge, as I always mention, the pole sitter gets a +1 bonus. So that makes Mark Martin a 12. We're looking at the green race rating. So Martin is a 12. Schrader is an 11. The challenge is at a -1. Schrader needs an 8 to 12 to take the lead. He rolls a 7 and fails. And Mark Martin is the early race leader. Okay, phase 1 is this red section. As you can see, I need to do a nozzle cleaning on my printer. We got some lines in here, but that's a early race mechanical check. So what we're going to do is randomly select the driver and the 4 adjacent drivers, and we will check the red mechanical rating for these drivers. So that check is coming from 54 Dale Earnhardt. So it's Dale Earnhardt. It's 12 o'clock is Ricky Rudd. Three o'clock, Bobby Hillin Jr. 6 o'clock, Larry Pearson. And 9 o'clock, Harry Gant. Now here at Bristol, mechanical checks get a +1. So we're looking at the red rating, the red mechanical problem avoidance rating. Earnhardt here is a 9. He would be a 10 here at Bristol. So that means at Bristol, there is a slightly less chance of a mechanical issue than the average track on the circuit. Okay, so if he rolls a die roll equal to his mechanical rating, he's had an issue and will have to come behind the wall, be back there a while, come back out. He'll be down several laps. He'll get a red lap marker. If he rolls greater than his mechanical rating, he's forced to retire from the race. All right, so Earnhardt is a 9. That makes him a 10, so he needs a 9 or less. He rolls a 6, and he is safe. So that's a pass. Ricky Rudd is an 11. +1 makes him a 12. He needs anything but boxcars, and he is safe on a 4. That's a pass. Bobby Hillin Jr. is a 7. That makes him an 8. He needs a 7 or less. He rolls an 8. That means he's had a mechanical issue. He is not forced to retire, but he does come behind the wall. He's back there a while, and he gets a red lap marker. So that's a fail and red lap marker. Next is Larry Pearson. He's a 6. That makes him a 7 here at Bristol. He needs a 6 or less, and he rolls that 6, so he passes. And last check will be Harry Gant. He's an 11. That makes him a 12. He needs anything but that 12. He rolls a 9, and he's safe. So the only mechanical issues in this early check was Bobby Hillin, but he's back out racing, trying to collect some points. Okay, so Gant passes that. And Mark Martin, who was not involved in that check, remains the race leader and will now face another challenge as we head into phase 2. And that challenge is coming from 62 Rusty Wallace. All right, Rusty Wallace is an 11. Mark Martin's an 11. Wallace is challenging at a 0. He needs a 7 to 12 to take the lead. He rolls a 9, and we have a new leader in Rusty Wallace. That's a pass. And Wallace is the new race leader. Okay, phase 2 is a phase of green flag racing. We'll select a random driver, 4 adjacent, and they'll go up against the leader, which is now Rusty Wallace. We'll be looking at the green race rating and utilizing the quality pass matrix. So this challenge is coming from 52. Points leader Bobby Hamilton. His 12 o'clock is Larry Pearson. 6 o'clock or 3 o'clock is Rusty Wallace, but of course he can't challenge himself. So it whips around to Bill Elliott. His 6 o'clock is Darrell Waltrip. And his 9 o'clock is King Richard. Okay, so we are looking at the green race rating. Hamilton's a 10, Rusty Wallace is an 11. Hamilton's challenging at a -1. He needs an 8 to 12. He rolls a 12, and we have a new leader in Bobby Hamilton. So Hamilton passes, and he's the leader. Remember, this is green flag racing. Okay, the next check is coming from Larry Pearson. Larry Pearson is a 2, Hamilton's a 10. That's a -8, that's an automatic failure. Larry Pearson was not trying to take the lead. He was trying to stay on the lead lap. So he fails automatically and is 1 lap down. Green lap markers are cumulative in this game. So that's a fail and a green lap marker. Okay, Bill Elliott is the next driver. He's an 11, Hamilton's a 10. Elliott's challenging at a +1. He needs a 6 to 12. He rolls a 9 and he takes the lead. Elliott's a pass, and he's now the leader. Next is Darrell Waltrip. Waltrip and Elliott are both 11s. Waltrip's challenging at a 0. He needs a 7 to 12. He rolls that 7, and the lead changes again to Darrell Waltrip. Pass, and he's the leader. And the final one's going to come from Richard Petty. He's an 8. Darrell Waltrip's an 11. This challenge by Richard Petty's at a -3. He needs a 10 to 12. He rolls an 8 and fails. Darrell Waltrip remains the race leader. Okay, phase 3 is broken down into 2 parts. Green flag pit stops is the first part. That should be blue. And then we do a penalty check in black. So the first thing is the green flag pit stops. We will once again select a random driver and 4 adjacent. They will go up against the leader, Darrell Waltrip, but this time we're going to look at the blue pit crew rating and use the quality pass matrix. So this challenge is coming from 52, again, Bobby Hamilton. Okay, his 12 o'clock is Larry Pearson. He can get his lap back, although I doubt it'll happen, but he is the 12 o'clock, so that is Pearson. He can get his lap back if he's successful. Excuse me. Hamilton's 3 o'clock is Rusty Wallace. Hamilton's 6 o'clock is Darrell Waltrip, but he can't challenge himself, so it whips up there to Jeff Bodine. And Hamilton's 9 o'clock is Richard Petty. A lot of the same drivers involved in this check. All right, so Hamilton's an 8, Darrell Waltrip's an 8. This challenge is at a 0. Remember, these are a series of green flag pit stops, so we may have several lead changes. Okay, Hamilton and Waltrip are 8s. Challenge is at a 0. Hamilton needs a 7 to 12. And he rolls that 7, and Bobby Hamilton has the lead again, at least for now. So that's a pass. And Hamilton is the leader. Okay, Larry Pearson is a 2. Bobby Hamilton is a 10. It's another automatic failure. So he does not get his lap back. He remains 1 lap down. That's a fail. And Bobby Hamilton remains the race leader. Rusty Wallace is an 8. Hamilton's an 8. Wallace is challenging at a 0. He needs a 7 to 12. He rolls a 7, and now Rusty Wallace takes the lead again. Well, he didn't have the lead earlier. I apologize for that. He takes the lead for the first time. So it's a pass, and it's Rusty Wallace. He'll be challenged by Brett Bodine. They're both 8s. Bodine is challenging at a 0. He needs a 7 to 12. He rolls a 5 and fails his challenge. Rusty Wallace remains the race leader. And the final one will come from Richard Petty. His pit crew rating is an 8. same as Rusty Wallace. Richard Petty's challenging at a 0. He needs a 7 to 12. He rolls a 9, and Richard Petty takes the lead. That's a pass. And Richard Petty. Okay, so the next part of phase 3, as I mentioned a little while ago, is a penalty check, this black area. And we're going to see if any infractions occurred during these pit stops. So what we'll do is we will check a random driver and 4 adjacent, and we'll look at their pit crew rating. This may or may not involve the leader. 54, Dale Earnhardt. Seems like most of the action so far has been coming over here. So it's Earnhardt. It's 12 o'clock is Ricky Rudd. His 3 o'clock can't be a red lap driver. Goes over to Ken Schrader. His 6 o'clock goes down to Bobby Hamilton because, oh no, actually, I'm sorry, Larry Pearson. He can be part of this. So it's Larry Pearson. And his 9 o'clock is Harry Gant. So once again, we're looking at the blue pit crew rating. And you need to be equal to or lower than the pit crew rating to not have an infraction. If you're greater than, you have an infraction, you have to come in for a stop and go, and you'll get a green lap marker. So Earnhardt's a 10. He needs a 10 or less. He rolls a 7. He's good. So Earnhardt passes. Next is Ricky Rudd. Rudd is a 9. He needs a 9 or less. He rolls a 6. He passes. So no infractions from those 2 drivers. Next is Ken Schrader. Schrader's an 8. He needs an 8 or less. He rolls a 9, unfortunately, and has some sort of infraction on pit row. He's forced to come back in for a stop and go and gets a green lap marker. The bad luck continues for Schrader, so he fails and a green lap marker. Next is Larry Pearson. He is a 4. He needs a 4 or less. He rolls an 8 and has an infraction, and now he is 2 laps down. So he gets a second green lap marker. So Pearson fails, and second green lap marker. The last one is Harry Gant. He's a 9. He needs a 9 or less. He rolls a 12. He also has an infraction, so he goes a lap down after a stop and go. Fail, and a green lap marker. And Richard Petty, after the penalty checks, because they could have included him, remains the race leader. And now, as we head into phase 4, there are going to be back-to-back challenges to the leader. And the first challenge to Petty is coming from 35, Stanley Smith. Okay, we're looking at the green race rating. Richard Petty is an 8. Stanley Smith is a 2. That's a -6, which is an automatic failure. Stanley Smith was trying to stay on the lead lap, not trying to take the lead, so he goes a lap down. So Smith fails. He gets a green lap marker. And Richard Petty remains the race leader and will face another challenge as we head into phase 4, which is going to be the contact check. That second challenge is coming from 24, rookie Ted Musgrave. All right, Musgrave is an 8. Richard Petty's an 8. So Musgrave is challenging at 0. He needs a 7 to 12. He rolls a 10, and we have a new leader in Ted Musgrave. So that's a pass. And Musgrave is the leader. Okay, now we're going to go into phase 4, which is a contact check. And whether or not we have contact will determine whether or not we have pit stops under caution. So contact check, we do a random driver 4 adjacent. And that's a 16. That's going to be Davey Allison. His 12 o'clock comes down here to Chad Little. His 3 o'clock is Rick Wilson. 6 o'clock is Alan Kulwicki. And his 9 o'clock, Hut Strickland. Okay, so for the contact, we're checking the yellow contact avoidance number. Here at Bristol, it's no surprise that that's a -1. So it's a little bit easier to have contact here than the average track on the circuit. So that makes Davey Allison's 10 a 9. He needs to be lower than that. If he's equal to it, he'll be several laps down due to contact and get a yellow lap marker. If he's greater than it, he's forced to retire due to contact. Okay, so he needs an 8 or less. Allison rolls a 6 and he's good. He passes. Allison passes. Next is Chad Little. Chad Little is also an 8. Or excuse me, he's not also an 8, he's an 8. That makes him a 7. He needs a 6 or less. He rolls a 5 and passes. Next is Rick Wilson. Rick Wilson is a 7. That makes him a 6. He needs a 5 or less. He rolls a 6, which means he was involved in some contact and has to come behind the wall. Gets back out there, but he's several laps down with a yellow lap marker. So that's a fail and a yellow. Next is Alan Kulwicki. He's a 7. That makes him a 6. He needs a 5 or less. He rolls a 6. And just like Rick Wilson, the two of them must have got together because Kulwicki had to come behind the wall. And he's back out there. Failed with the yellow lap marker. And the last check will be Hut Strickland. Hut Strickland's a 7. That makes him a 6. He needs a 5 or less. He rolls a 3, and he is safe. So he passes. And after all that, Ted Musgrave remains the leader. So now we're going to do pit stops under caution. It's going to be the race leader, Ted Musgrave, 4 adjacent, and it cannot include a lap driver, 4 adjacent, and 1 random driver. So it'll be Ted Musgrave. These are pit stops under caution. He'll be first. Or excuse me, not Ted Musgrave. These checks are going up against Ted Musgrave. His 12 o'clock is Mickey Gibbs. His 3 o'clock is the pride of Birdwick, PA, Jimmy Spencer. His 6 o'clock is Mark Martin. And his 9 o'clock whips over to Dale Earnhardt. And the 1 random driver will be 52, Bobby Hamilton. He's been involved quite a bit in this race. All right, so the first check, Musgrave. We're looking at the blue pit crew rating. It's going to be Mickey Gibbs. Mickey Gibbs is a 7, Musgrave's an 8. Challenge is at a -1. Gibbs needs an 8 to 12. He rolls a 6 and fails. Ted Musgrave remains the race leader. Next is Jimmy Spencer. Jimmy Spencer is a 7. Musgrave's an 8. Challenge is at a -1. Spencer needs an 8 to 12. He rolls a 6 and fails. Ted Musgrave remains the race leader. Mark Martin, next check. He's an 8. Musgrave's an 8. Challenge is at a 0. Martin needs a 7 to 12. He rolls a 9, and Mark Martin has the lead again. So that's a pass. And he has the lead. Next is Dale Earnhardt. Earnhardt is a 10. Martin is an 8. Earnhardt's challenging at a +2. He needs a 5 to 12. He rolls that 5 and just gets the lead there. So he's now the leader. So that's a pass. And the last check will be Bobby Hamilton. Bobby Hamilton's an 8. Dale Earnhardt's a 10. Hamilton's challenging at a -2. He needs a 9 to 12. He rolls an 8 and fails. And we have a new race leader in Dale Earnhardt. All right, so he is going to face a challenge as we head out of phase 4 and into the closing laps action. So we'll randomly select the driver to challenge Dale Earnhardt for the lead, and that's going to be 63 Morgan Shepherd. All right, they're both 11s. So Morgan Shepherd is challenging at a 0. He needs a 7 to 12. He rolls an 8, and we have a new leader in Morgan Shepherd. Pass. And he's the leader. Or Shepherd is the leader. Okay, so now we're going to see if there's any late race mechanical checks. And that's going to be just the leader. And here, the last highlight event table, mechanical. It's very likely to happen. It'll happen on a 4 to 12. We roll a 9, so that's going to be a yes. So this is only the leader. He can't be forced to retire in this check, but we're going to look at his mechanical avoidance rating, which is the red number. And here, that gets a +1. So that becomes a 7. So Morgan Shepherd needs a 6 or less. He rolls a 10. He can't be forced to retire in this late phase action, but he's forced to come in, go behind the wall, and he's going to be down several laps. So Shepherd on the mechanical check, he fails. So now we have to determine the new leader, and we do that by using the rules of priority. Cannot include a lap driver. So Morgan Shepherd's 12 o'clock becomes Dave Marcus. He's a 6. His 3 o'clock whips over to Terry Labonte. He's a 10. His 6 o'clock is Rusty Wallace. He's an 11. And his 9 o'clock is Brett Bodine. He's a 9. So based on the rules of priority, Rusty Wallace is now the race leader. And he will now face a challenge. And that challenge is coming from 66 Hut Strickland. Hut Strickland's an 11. Rusty Wallace is an 11. This challenge by Strickland is at 0. He needs a 7 to 12. He rolls that 12, and we have a new leader in Hut Strickland. So Strickland passes, and he is the new leader. All right, so now we're going to see if there's any late race contact. Here at Bristol, that'll happen on a 5 to 12. We roll a 7, so that is also a yes. And that is going to involve the race leader, Hut Strickland, Jason Cars, and 1 random. So it's Hut Strickland. His 12 o'clock wraps down here to Joe Rootman. His 3 o'clock comes over to Davey Allison. His 6 o'clock is Dave Marcus. His 9 o'clock is Jeff Bodine. And the random driver, 52, Bobby Hamilton, who has been involved a lot this race. All right, so we are looking at the yellow contact number, contact avoidance number. It gets a -1 here. So Hut Strickland is a 7, makes him a 6. He needs a 5 or less. He rolls a 7. Hut Strickland is forced to retire due to some contact. So that's a fail. So we'll have to determine a new leader after all this. We'll leave that marker there. Okay, next is Joe Rootman. Rootman is a 9, becomes an 8. He needs a 7 or less. He rolls snake eyes. He's safe. Pass. Davey Allison is a 10. He becomes a 9, needs an 8 or less. Rolls a 7. He's safe. Pass. Dave Marcus is a 10. He becomes a 9. He needs an 8 or less. He rolls a 9. So he is involved in contact. Goes behind the wall. Gets back out. Gets a yellow lap marker. So that's a fail. So Strickland failed and DNF'd. I didn't write that down. Marcus failed and gets a yellow lap marker. Next is Jeff Bodine. He's a 9. Becomes an 8. He needs a 7 or less. He rolls a 10, and Jeff Bodine is also forced to retire. Fail. DNF. And lastly will be the random driver, Bobby Hamilton. He's a 10. He becomes a 9. He needs an 8 or less. He rolls a 9, and Bobby Hamilton, points leader, Bobby Hamilton gets involved, and he is forced to retire. Not good. That's a DNF for Hamilton. So now we have to determine a new leader from Hut Strickland's position here. Okay, so we use the rules of priority. His 12 o'clock is Joe Rootman with a 9. His 3 o'clock is Davey Allison with an 11. His 6 o'clock is Rusty Wallace with an 11. And his 9 o'clock is Dale Jarrett with a 10. That means Davey Allison, 16 points behind Bobby Hamilton, who just got knocked out in the race, is the race leader. This has the potential to shake things up. Okay, but now since we had contact, we have to do pit stops under contact, and pit stops under caution, and this is going to include the leader, 4 adjacent, and 1 random driver. All right, so let's see who the adjacent are. Would be 12 o'clock is Chad Little. 3 o'clock is Sterling Marlin. 6 o'clock is Terry Labonte, because we're not including any of these lap drivers. 6 o'clock is Terry Labonte. 9 o'clock is Dale Jarrett. Comes all the way around to Dale Jarrett. And 1 random driver. 31, Michael Waltrip. Okay, so we're looking at the blue pit crew ratings on this, going up against leader Davey Allison. First will be Chad Little. Chad Little's a 7, Allison's an 8. Little's challenging at a -1. He needs an 8 to 12. He rolls an 11 and takes the lead. So Chad Little's now in the lead. Next is Sterling Marlin. Marlin's an 8. Chad Little is a 7, so Marlin's challenging at a +1. He needs a 6 to 12. He rolls a 9, and Sterling Marlin takes the lead. Remember, these are pit stops, so Little passed, Marlin passed. Now it's Labonte. Labonte is a 7. Marlin's an 8. Challenges at a -1. Labonte needs an 8 to 12. He rolls a 7 and fails. So Sterling Marlin remains the leader. Next is Dale Jarrett. Jarrett's a 7. Marlin's an 8. Dale Jarrett's challenging at a -1. Needs an 8 to 12. Rolls an 11. Dale Jarrett takes the lead here late in the race. Pass. And the final check will be Michael Waltrip against Dale Jarrett. Waltrip's an 8. Jarrett's a 7. Michael Waltrip's challenging at a +1. He needs a 6 to 12. He rolls an 8. And after all those pit stops, it's Michael Waltrip in the lead. So here under the lights, at Bristol. We are getting near the end. Michael Waltrip is now going to face a challenge. And that challenge is coming from 25, Mickey Gibbs. All right, Waltrip's an 11, Gibbs is an 8. This challenge is at a -3. Gibbs needs a 10 to 12 to take the lead. He rolls a 6 and fails. Michael Waltrip remains the race leader. Now, the next closing laps action would be a pit crew check, a pit stop. But because we did have pit stops under caution, it says event void if pit stops under caution have taken, so we skip that. And the last part of the closing action phase is to determine whether or not there's some late race green flag racing. That'll happen on a 9 to 12. We rolled a 9, so there's going to be some late green flag racing. And that is going to be the leader, his adjacent cars, and one random. So these drivers will be going up against the leader. So 12 o'clock is Jimmy Means. Waltrip's 3 o'clock is Lake Speed. His 6 o'clock wraps around to the top to Sterling Marlin. His 6 o'clock, or excuse me, 9 o'clock is Ernie Irvin. We haven't heard his name this race. And the random driver, 56. No one's there, so we'll roll again. 12, Bill Elliott. Okay, so we're looking at the green race rating. First up, Jimmy Means. Means is a 2. Michael Waltrip is an 11. That's a -9. Jimmy Means was trying to stay on the lead lap, so he fails, goes a green lap marker down. So that's a fail, green. Next is Lake Speed. Speed is a 6. Michael Waltrip is an 11. That's a -5. It's an automatic failure, but he remains on the lead lap. So that's a fail. Michael Waltrip still remains the race leader. Next is Sterling Marlin. They're both 11s. Sterling Marlin's challenging at a 0, needs a 7 to 12. He rolls an 8. And takes the lead here late in the race under the lights at Bristol. So that's a pass for Marlin. Now he's going up against Ernie Irvin. They're both 11s. Irvin's challenging at a 0, needs a 7 to 12. Rolls an 8. And we have a new leader in Ernie Irvin. Pass. The final challenge is coming from Bill Elliott. Not the final challenge of the race, but the final green flag racing challenge is Bill Elliott. He's an 11. Irvin's an 11. Challenges at a 0. Bill Elliott needs a 7 to 12. He rolls snake eyes and fails, and Ernie Irvin remains the race leader and is now going to face the final challenge. The way we determine this, we use the adjacent drivers and the rules of priority. Well, I can already tell you it's going to be Kyle Petty, but we'll go through it. So Kyle Petty's the 12 o'clock, he has an 11. Michael Waltrip is the 3 o'clock, he has an 11. Mickey Gibbs is the 6 o'clock, he has an 8. Chad Little has an 8. So it's Waltrip and Kyle Petty, Michael Waltrip and Kyle Petty with the 11s. Based on the rules of priority, the challenge is coming from Kyle Petty. Kyle Petty, who dominated early this season and has been very quiet since and finds himself in the middle of the pack, has an opportunity to win a race here as the season is winding down. Okay, so they're both 11s. Challenge is at a 0. Kyle Petty needs a 7 to 12 to pass Ernie Irvin and win this race. Anything else, Ernie Irvin holds him off and wins. And we roll snake eyes, and Ernie Irvin holds off Kyle Petty. And under the lights here at Bristol in the Bud 500 on August 24th, 1991 in a replay, Ernie Irvin wins the race. All right, so now we get to what I always refer to as the fun part. Ernie Irvin is the winner, so we'll leave the marker here for him. Kyle Petty, who lost that final challenge, finishes second. And the other drivers who were eligible for that final challenge will finish based on the rules of priority. So Michael Waltrip has the 11. He finishes third. Mickey Gibbs is at 6 o'clock. He and Chad Little both have 8, so Mickey Gibbs gets the nod based on the rules of priority. Good finish for Mickey Gibbs in 4th place, and rounding out the top 5 is Chad Little. Okay, so now we use the winner's spot and we go clockwise around the grid, removing drivers based on race rating. So next would be Bill Elliott, Ken Schrader's lapped. Then it'd be Davey Allison, Sterling Marlin, Rusty Wallace, Darrell Waltrip. Those are all the 11s. So now we go to 10s. Terry Labonte, lapped, Dale Jarrett, lapped. That's it for the 10s. Now we go to 9s. It's Joe Rootman. The only other driver in this groove that's not lapped is Lake Speed, so he comes off. So now we move in one groove, and we go clockwise once again. So it's going to be Mark Martin with an 11, Ricky Rudd, Dale Earnhardt, and that's it for the 11s. So now we'll look for 10s. No 10s. 9s be Rick Mast. 8s be Ted Musgrave and Richard Petty. Everyone else in this groove is lapped. So then we move in, starting there, and we go around this, and it's going to be Brett Bodine, Jimmy Spencer, and Derek Cope. So now we go back out to the race winners groove, which is out here. So all the drivers that remain on the grid are lapped. So now we're going to remove based on race rating and lapped status. So Ken Schrader's 1 lap down. He comes off next. Yellow lap markers. We got Kowicki with an 11, an 8, and a 6. So it'll be Kowicki. Or excuse me, no, that's not true. We got to put that back there. We got to take care of all the green lap markers first. So next we go in a groove, and we got Stanley. All 3 of these guys have green lap markers. Larry Pearson has 2. We just go clockwise with Stanley Smith, Jimmy Means, and Larry Pearson. No, Larry Pearson has 2. I'm sorry. We're going to get Harry Gant and then Larry Pearson. All right, so now we go back out to the outside groove. Hope I didn't confuse anyone with that. All right, so it'll be Alan Kowicki with the yellow, Rick Wilson with the yellow, Dave Marcus with the yellow. And the only 2 drivers left are Morgan Shepherd and Bobby Hillin Jr. Morgan Shepherd has the 11, so he comes off first. And then Bobby Hillin Jr. comes off next. So we got the stack of drivers. We take the drivers who did not finish, put them on the bottom. Move all this stuff aside. And here at Bristol under the lights for the Bud 500, in a replay from August 24th, 1991. Winner, Ernie Irvan. The rest of the top 5, Kyle Petty, Michael Waltrip, Mickey Gibbs, and Chad Little. 6 through 10, Bill Elliott, Davey Allison, Sterling Marlin, Rusty Wallace, and Darrell Waltrip. So that's going to shake up the points a bit. And I'll figure that out, and I'll have that for you for the next race, which is at Darlington. That'll be race number 21 as this season winds down. 9 more to go. So I think looking at these drivers here, it's very possible things have tightened up a bit. Davey Allison more than likely is going to be the new points leader, but we'll see what happens. It's hard to say. I'm not a mathematician. I can't do this off the top of my head. Anyway, if you hung out with me tonight, I appreciate your patience, and thank you very much. Hope you had a good time, and I'll be back again in the near future with another video, and until then, take care.